Now what? What are you going to do now? What's going to feed your soul? The liberal arts are about that, it seems to me.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the senior publishing director at Word on Fire. What are the liberal arts, and why are so many schools and universities getting rid of them? That's what we'll be discussing today with Bishop Robert Barron, who joins us from the Word on Fire studio in Rochester, Minnesota. Bishop, good to see you as always.
Hey, Brandon, how you doing?
Doing well. Now, you recently visited one of the most prestigious Catholic universities in the country, the University of Notre Dame. Why were you there? How'd your visit go?
Yeah, I was there as March the 2nd, I think it was, and I was invited by the student body president and some others just to address the university community. And they asked me generally to talk about, the nature of a Catholic university, this sort of classical issue. And went down there and I had Mass at the Basilica, and it was a very good crowd for that. And, I love that church. I was a student there many, many years ago. My first year of college, before I went to seminary, I was at Notre Dame. So I prayed in that chapel from the time I was, 19, 18 years old. So I said Mass, and then I gave a talk that was very well attended, a lot of enthusiasm, about the nature of a Catholic university. And then we had a wonderful kind of Q&A session afterwards. So no, it was a great joy. I loved it.
I want to talk about a trend in schools, both high school and the university level, concerning the liberal arts, also sometimes called the humanities. There was an article in the New Yorker that made the rounds last month. I saw it shared and discussed everywhere. It was called The End of the English Major. And it revealed that during the past decade, from roughly 2012 to 2022, the study of English and history at the collegiate level has fallen by a full third. And many large schools have fallen even further. They gave a few examples. Humanities majors at Ohio State University fell 46% over the last decade. Notre Dame, where you just were, fell by 50%. At some universities, the decline was upwards of 75% over this past decade. You picked up on this trend in a recent article that you wrote. You cited the specific example of Marymount University, which is a Catholic university in Arlington, Virginia, which recently announced that they're cutting several of their liberal arts majors from their program, including philosophy, religious studies, and theology. That's what I want to talk about here, but maybe let's start by defining our terms and understanding what are the liberal arts to begin with, and what specifically do we mean by liberal?
Yeah, of course, it's a famously slippery word. In this context, I would just take it in a very straightforward way. The Latin word liber, which means free. So the liberal arts are free arts. Now, what are they free from? They're free from utility. So think of a discipline like, auto mechanics. That's a very utilitarian discipline. It's designed to help you fix a car so that you can use that car and go somewhere. Or think of someone who's trained in engineering, and they're trained to build homes or bridges or whatever it is. So they use their knowledge to produce something in the real world. Obviously, these are wonderful things, the useful sciences. But see, they're not free because they're tied to a product that they're designed to give rise to. The liberal arts, on the other hand, are those that are free from utility because they're simply good in themselves. Why do you study English literature? Well, to get a job, you could look at it that way. But, in itself, it's fairly useless to study English literature. Why would you study philosophy? What I studied as a young man, supremely useless discipline. What do you produce with it? What does it give rise to in the practical order? Well, nothing. But see, that's the point. That means those are higher sciences, because they have to do with things that are intrinsically valuable. The knowledge that they generate is good in itself. So in that sense, they're free. Think of the experience of watching a baseball game, if you're a baseball fan. See, baseball is a good example because it's kind of a slow game, and it unfolds very deliberately, and you have to be very attuned contemplatively to what's going on in a baseball game. But you spend 3.5 hours, let's say, maybe you've kept score. You've been contemplating so carefully that you're keeping score of what's going on. Now the game is over, right? And you say, well, why did I do that? What good did that do me? Well, you probably throw the scorecard away. But see, the point was, no, while you were watching it, you were simply basking in the goodness of that experience. There was something intrinsically valuable about watching a baseball game. I tell my students years ago that you look at a newspaper, and you say, well, now, what are the most important and serious parts of the paper? And by natural instinct, we'd say, oh, the business section or the political section. No, on the contrary, because those are practical disciplines. The most important, the highest parts of the paper, I would argue, are the comics and the sports page, because those are things that we do uselessly. They're contemplated for their own sake. They have to do, in a word, the liberal arts I'm talking about, they have to do with meaning, with purpose, and with value. See? Where the useful arts, well, they're ordered to something outside themselves. And you say, okay, I've got a good car, it functions well, gets me there fast. Great. Now, what do you do when you get there? I don't know, I get the car and go somewhere else. No, but eventually you have to stop producing anything, stop going anywhere else. You have to stop, and now what? What are you going to do now? What's going to feed your soul? The liberal arts are about that, it seems to me.
When you read these articles on the decline of the liberal arts, a lot of students are cited in these articles explaining why, maybe they came to school thinking they'd major in English, but then later decided to switch to engineering or law or pre-med or something.
Yeah.
And the common trope you hear is something to the effect of, well, I realized I wouldn't be able to get a job if I majored in that. It seems to me there's this major shift in our culture from the classical model, which saw education as forming you as a human to help you to flourish as a fully virtuous and wise human, to the much more utilitarian approach of, I go to school so I can learn something for which I can get a high-paying job, and then I'll live a good life. Have you noticed that shift as well in education?
Of course, it's happened in my lifetime. It was starting to happen way back in the 19th century, which is one reason why John Henry Newman wrote The Idea of a University. He was seeing that tendency. Newman, of course, came out of this Oxford culture of the mid-19th century that put such a high value on the liberal arts, on things like ancient language. So you'd study ancient Greek and Latin. Well, what good's that going to do you? Julius Caesar's not going to show up for a friendly conversation. But see, they remarked something, that being immersed in that great literature, written in those original languages, gave you access to values at the epistemic and the moral and the aesthetic level that were not available anyplace else. I mean, why do you read the Iliad and the Odyssey? Why do you read the Aeneid? Why would you read the masterpieces of classical literature? Because they're about humanity. They open up dimensions of the soul and of meaning and purpose that you get nowhere else. Well, why would you bother read them in a good translation? Well, no, if you're going to read them, of course read them if you can in the language that originally produced them. That way you'll get the texture of the soul behind these books. That's what they appreciated very deeply in the liberal arts tradition. Newman began to see exactly the trend you're talking about, is the university is a place for training in a utilitarian framework. And he bemoaned it. One of his observations, though, what's interesting, is there's a paradox, that actually those who are trained in the liberal arts, in things like philosophy and logic and literature and so on, actually have minds trained in such a way that it makes them better at whatever the practical art happens to be. So he would probably say, no, have your minds trained, he called it in the philosophical habit, and then learn the practicalities on the job, but you'll actually be much better at your practical work with the liberal arts background. Well, it was just starting 19th century. I mean, picked up pace like mad in the 20th century. In our own time, it's the STEM domination, and people know what I'm talking about when you say STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math, right? STEM, that's what it's all about, being trained in those areas. And that will make you, productive and give you a good job and all that. And again, as we've said a million times, I got nothing against any of those things. But a totally STEM-trained person, that's half a person at best, because you've not been immersed in what makes science, technology, engineering, mathematics helpful to you. You won't know how to use them in a way that's truly humane. So that's a dangerous trend within our educational system.
I'm glad you brought up that paradox, because I've heard the same thing now that I've founded a classical high school, the Chesterton Academy of Orlando. I've heard from business owners locally and nationally that they're hungry for graduates of classical and liberal arts schools, because they tend to be people who can think critically, who can write and speak and express themselves clearly. They can problem solve. So it is an irony that liberal arts majors may actually end up helping you to get a job rather than the other way around.
Yeah, Newman saw that long ago, and I think it's still true.
You say in your article, and I'm quoting you here, the loss of the liberal arts is tantamount to a loss of soul. Mm-hmm. What do we lose whenever we diminish or ignore the liberal arts?
We lose why we do the things we do. We lose the point of our technology. I got cell phones and computers, and I've got cameras, and I've got access to every possible, movie and everything. Yeah, but why? Why ultimately? What are those things making possible for you? How are you using those things in a moral sense? As I said before, what do you do when you get there so quickly because of all your technology? That's what the liberal arts are about. They're about purpose, meaning, value. And I think, Brandon, there's a correlation between the loss of these liberal arts that deal with meaning and the fact that so many, sadly, of our young people are reporting spikes in anxiety and in depression, in suicidal ideation. Well, I think there's a correlation. If you just aggressively bracket all the questions of meaning, well, then I'm surrounded by all my technology. You know that wonderful It's a Woodcut by Albrecht Dürer called Melancholia, and it shows this angelic figure, beautiful figure with the wings and everything, and surrounded by all the high technology of that time, would have been 16th century Renaissance Germany, all the gadgets and the tools of the time. And there this figure sits in melancholy, because those things won't give rise to joy, because they don't give rise to meaning. Now, once I find joy and find meaning, heck, use them all. Use all these things, You'll know what to do with them. So I'm afraid we have a society that is like that melancholic figure. They're surrounded by all these gadgets, but then they're sad. They don't know what to do with them.
It seems to me that the primary reason the liberal arts are being pushed to the side is because they apparently lack practical purpose. They lack utility. But in our time, we're seeing another big round of objections to them come because critics claim that the liberal arts, and by this we might think of the great books of the Western world, the classical texts of civilization, that almost all of these are marked by racism, bigotry, or other flaws. In fact, in your article, you highlight some of these complaints. You say, all that many younger students know about Shakespeare is that he's a dead white male. All that they know about Thomas Jefferson is that he owned slaves. And all that they know about T.S. Eliot is that he entertained some anti-Semitic opinions. What's wrong with this approach to the liberal arts?
Well, see, it's killing them. And let's, for sake of argument, let's say that all those things are true of the people you met. Well, poor Shakespeare can't avoid being a dead white male, I suppose. But I mean, let's assign all of these negative moral qualities to these people. For sake of argument, say that they're all true. And indeed, Jefferson had slaves, and indeed, Eliot said some things that were anti-Semitic and so on. True. Is it good that we know about that? Sure. I mean, we should be aware of these flaws and cognizant of them and all of that. But the tragedy is, Brandon, if that's all we see in these people, that's all we see. as though the wasteland or the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock or the Death in the Cathedral have nothing to say about life and about love and about meaning and purpose and value. All right, they're produced by a flawed human being. Show me one work of art that wasn't. But if we allow, the moral preoccupations of our time now to obscure the achievements of an Eliot or a Shakespeare or a Dante or a Jefferson, I mean, God help us. God help us. And so that's, I think, another side of the baleful woke movement is that it's undercutting our access to the very things that are giving life greater meaning. Who taught us, by the way, that anti-Semitism was a bad thing? Well, the great moral tradition, that's what taught us that. Who taught us it's wrong to own slaves? Well, the great biblical and moral tradition. And so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is to notice moral flaws in artists, sure, of course. But it doesn't mean you jettisoned all those great works of art and stopped reading them. That, to me, is a tragedy.
I want to get your thoughts on one of the liberal arts in particular, and that's philosophy. When I went through school, I'm pretty typical. I went to 12 years of public school and then a public university. I was not offered a single philosophy class. When I got to college, I was not required to take a single philosophy class. Later, I recognized this as an enormous deprivation. Do you think that philosophy should once again become a standard and perhaps even required course for high schoolers and university students?
Yes. I mean, it's for the moment, bracket religion, which has all these difficult, kind of legal overtones in our society. So bracket religion for a second, but just bring philosophy back into it as a kind of central organizing discipline, that which allows you to understand how all the different disciplines relate to each other, that which speaks of the most fundamental or the highest truth. I remember Robert Sokolowski, my great mentor, one of his definitions of philosophy is making present that which is basic. That's what the philosopher does. So through certain rational moves, think of how Plato did it, or Wittgenstein, any of them, making present that which is basic. So a lot of life we live on the superficial level. We're dealing with reality, but not with the most basic reality. So what is justice? What makes a society just? What is the moral act? What makes my act morally good? Why is there something rather than nothing? What explains the intelligibility of the world? Well, those are questions that philosophers ask. And if you ask them the right way and respond in the right way, you can make present that which is basic. If we live in a society in which no one even bothers to ask those questions anymore, then we're living, by definition, superficially. And that's morally dangerous.
I'd also like your thoughts on a subset of the liberal arts, which are the fine arts. So why is it important that we train students to draw and paint, to sing in the choir, to act on the stage, to give speeches, to engage in debate? Why are the fine arts important?
What did our friend Chesterton say? Anything worth doing is worth doing badly, right? And so look at painting or music or drama at the high levels, and you look at a Shakespeare, you look at Michelangelo, and you say, okay, here's someone that really knew how to make present that which is basic, who really knew how to elucidate the deepest values and did it in a way that was compellingly beautiful, right? Terrific. Well, that should awaken in you the desire to imitate them, knowing fully well that you'll, unless I'm talking to some geniuses out there, are not going to reach that level. But again, who cares? Anything worth doing, and that's the thing. Boy, has Michelangelo taught me that painting and sculpture are worth doing. Has Shakespeare taught me, boy, is writing a play worth doing? Has Plato taught me, boy, is asking and answering philosophical questions worth doing? Anything worth doing is worth doing badly. That means, well, I can get in that game, even though I'm a very inadequate, playing partner for these people. But the best way to honor someone like Plato is to try to write a dialogue or try to do your own philosophical reflection. The best way to honor Beethoven, if you're a musician, well, then you try, you know. Well, there's training in the fine arts. I think is marvelous.
Well, as we wrap up here, I'd like you to imagine you're standing in front of a room full of 1,000 high schoolers and college students. How would you make the case that they should study and maybe even major in the liberal arts? As you close your article, why should they read Plato, Jeremiah, Shakespeare, and Dante? Why should they gaze on Michelangelo, Picasso, and Rembrandt? Why should they listen to Mozart, Bach, and Stravinsky?
So they'll know what to do when their GPS gets them somewhere. They'll know what to do when their technology makes their life more convenient. But if all we're doing is living at that level of the superficial, we're just going to go from place to place and time to time, and we won't know what to do. We won't know the kind of people we're meant to become. When you study those great figures, you enter into that dimension of life. And now when your GPS gets you someplace, well, maybe you're going someplace worth going because you've studied the liberal arts. And once you get there, you'll know what to do because you've understood moral discipline through the liberal arts. Once you get there, you can start producing something beautiful because you've realized what beauty is and why it matters. See, but otherwise you're gonna get places faster and you'll live life more conveniently, but you'll be like that Durer's angel. You'll just be in a state of melancholia because you won't know what to do, you know? That's why I would say study the liberal arts because you need to feed your soul as well as make life for your body more comfortable.
Well, it's time now for a question from one of our listeners. If you have a question for Bishop Barron, send it in to us. You can record it at the website askbishopbarron.com. Today we have one from Bob in New Jersey, and he's posing an objection that many critics of Christianity have voiced up and down the years. Here's his question.
Hello, Bishop Barron. This is Bob from New Jersey. What is your response to the statement made by several noteworthy people that more blood has been shed in history over the name of Jesus Christ than any other individual? Thank you.
I think that's demonstrably false. I think that's a sort of a canard of anti-religious people going back to like the 19th century, that religion is the source of all violence. I mean, has it been? Sure. I'm looking at the wars of religion in Europe. And see, in many ways, those wars of religion from the period right after the Reformation, that haunts the minds of so many of the Enlightenment figures who gave rise to our modern society. And I think that's where that trope comes from, that religion's a source of violence. But look at these, there have been so many studies done now of the wars that have bedeviled humanity. A vanishingly small percentage are actually caused by or predicated upon religion. I can think of so many more people in whose name blood has been shed. Think of the awful tyrants of the last century, Hitler and Stalin and Mao, and these people that called for a personal loyalty. The corpses piled up by these people. So no, I don't agree with that at all. That Jesus somehow. I mean, sure, if you're killing people in Jesus' name, you're misusing that name. So that's one thing. There's nothing intrinsic to Christianity that gives rise to violence. On the contrary, we hold up this person to whom great violence was done, you know? So sure, his name can be misused, and it has been, but I think it's crazy to say it's somehow, uniquely responsible for bloodshed. That's ridiculous.
Well, as we wrap up today, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to both of Word on Fire's YouTube channels. That's right, both. We actually have two. I found many people are not aware of that. They follow Bishop Barron's main YouTube channel, and there you'll find new films, shows like this one, interviews such as the Bishop Barron Presents series, the Word on Fire show episodes, and much more. We also have a second channel, the Word on Fire Institute channel, recently crossed 100,000 subscribers, and we have a whole another set of videos that we release through that channel every single week. So I'll include links to both of these channels below. When you subscribe, which is totally free, YouTube will send you an email every time there's a new video release. So 2-3 videos a week. So if you want to stay on top of all the exciting stuff coming out of Word on Fire, that's one of the best ways to do it. Well, thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time on the Word on Fire show.